Welcome everyone to our webinar entitled Navigating the Current Moment, Continuing Equity Work in the Face of Hostility. My name is Adenike Huggins. I'm Senior Director, Education Policy and Advocacy at the National Urban League. And I am pleased to be joined today by our panelists, Sarah White, Dr. Dakota Irby, and Dr. Libby Sanier. Welcome. So this is session 3 of our Education and Youth Development webinar series. And today we're focusing on strategies and approaches to navigating the current climate in the face of increasing hostility. The erasure and attacks by the current administration are in direct conflict with the work we are committed to do. So while we know and are committed to resisting, it is necessary to discuss how we might do so strategically. And our guests today are all committed advocates for equity and social justice. Today's conversation is meant for us to learn from and alongside them as we all grapple with what it means and looks like to continue justice-oriented work in the face of relentless attacks and erasure. So to get us started, why don't we do some introductions? I'd like to ask each of our 3 panelists to share a little bit about yourselves and the work that you're currently doing.
I'll go ahead.
Their order you want us to go in,
Yeah,
or?
that
No
was my
order.
question.
That was it. Okay, Libby, you got it.
Sure. So I'm Libby Saunier. I am the CEO of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization squarely focused on children birth to 4 in the state of Louisiana. And we really have a mission of ensuring that a stronger Louisiana starts with successful children. And so we are basically a policy think tank in the state. We really spend a lot of time in the early childhood systems place, and what we're known for primarily is our work around early childhood education and making sure that access to early childhood education is is accessible and is of quality. And so that takes on a lot of different work. We really lead with policy data research and spend our time in that space. And that is the narrative that we use as we talk about our work. What's the need? Who has access? Who doesn't have access? What does it look like? What are the disparities across the state by geography and by the different communities in our state that are either have a desert related to childcare, but also we spend a lot of time around early childhood systems as a whole. So if we don't have healthy mamas, we don't have healthy babies. And if we don't have healthy babies, we can't educate them. And so we do policy work with partners around 5 key areas around what does a family and provider system look like when parents and providers have seats at the table for decision making. We also do work around what does a healthy start look like, that we are ensuring that the supports and services are needed for young children and their parents. Along with what does it look like for families to have a net that works? Because we all have networks, but what does it really look like to have a net that works for children and families to be connected to the supports and services that they need? And also around childcare, having for everyone everywhere in our state. And what does a family friendly workplace look like, meeting the needs of families and the communities that our families work, live, and try to thrive in?
I can go next. My name is Sarah White, and I am the founder and executive director of the South Dakota Education Equity Coalition. I am Oglala Lakota, and I currently reside in Rapid City. SDEC is what we affectionately call our organization, and it's an Indigenous student advocacy organization designed to ultimately close the achievement gap for Native American students in the state of South Dakota. But we do a lot right now. We're doing a lot of foundational bilateral state to tribal government relationship building. And in a nutshell, that's me right now.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be a part of this panel. My name is Dakota Irby. I'm a father, educator, author, musician. I am a faculty member in the Department of Educational Policy Studies at University of Illinois at Chicago, where I work primarily in our urban education leadership program, which trains school practitioners to become leaders at the school and at the district levels. I'm also the founding director of our Brothers Teaching Initiative, which is an initiative that recruits, supports, and graduates males of color to go into teaching. And finally, I'm a co-director of our Center for Urban Education Leadership, where I lead a research portfolio that focuses on how to create educational organizations that are free from racism and other forms of oppression, and that people of color and people who experience the margins of society are able to thrive in. That's a little bit about me. I'm also a father of a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old who attend Chicago public schools and very active in my community. I'm sometimes a baseball coach and sometimes a volleyball coach, depends on what hat I need to have on a particular day of the week. So I'm very pleased to be a part of this conversation. Thank y'all.
Thank you. And so in recent months, we've seen the federal government cancel or threaten justice-oriented work, which is also leading to the erasure of histories and the distortion of what equity and justice-oriented work is. From your particular perspectives, what is the significance of continuing equity and justice-oriented work in education in the face of this increasing hostility? That's for whoever's called to answer first.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in and get us started since I spoke last. I think that right now is needed, it's always something that's going to be needed in our society. Um, it's particularly important now because the federal policies and in many states, state level policies, school districts are creating policies and engaging in things that make families and their students um, you know, extra vulnerable, a higher level of vulnerability that young people in communities are experiencing. I'm thinking back to um, here in Chicago, ICE agents have instilled a tremendous amount of fear, and especially Latinx community, but communities of color where there's large immigrant populations and undocumented populations, all the way to, you know, book bans, all those different sorts of things that are happening to families, that are happening to folks in schools. Again, in this conversation, I'm going to talk a lot about schools, just from, my vantage point. But I think now, doing leadership work, doing equity work is more important than ever. Um, I think that one of the important things that we should keep in mind during this moment is that while there can be policies and legislative approaches to try to, control a lot of things, that we still have a tremendous amount of control and influence. Um, as if we're thinking about things from, as being parents, or if we're thinking about our role as members of different communities, whether it's faith communities or cultural communities and groups, we can still engage in the kinds of work and the kinds of advocacy and the kinds of kind of critical approaches to supporting communities of color that can't be legislated. I think the thing that I've kept in mind and I continue to remind people is that this is not new. What we're experiencing is not new, and that we have to look to the lessons of the past, and sometimes we have to look to other places to understand and appreciate what we can be doing and what works. Before there was any culturally responsive anything in schools, there were parents and grandparents and folks educating their children, talking to their children about history before there were any history bans. Folks still did that work. So I think thinking about the range of different kind of spaces that we operate in that might not be like formal school spaces or formal educational spaces, and making sure that even if it's not school, that we're still engaging young people and communities in the educational practices that affirm their identities and their values, and just basically operate in a spirit of resistance and refusal to be erased. That we've done it before, and we should just continue to do those things. I know we'll probably move into this a little bit later, but I say that with the caveat that there are different consequences and different stakes depending on, where people are, what kind of institutional support they have, what kind of communities they're a part of, whether you're in a kind of like Republican leaning area that has MAGA support, or whether you're in a more, like we are in Chicago, more Democratic leaning area. There's those, but I think those are the things that actually shape the responses that people have to continue to do equity work.
And I'll piggyback and say, why we continue to do this work is because it is the work. And as someone who really is steeped in the data every day, the data is, we know the children that need to be served. We know the communities in which they need to be served. And so, my viewpoint of the world is around birth to really prenatal to through 4-year-olds. And in our state, we have 70% of our kindergartners not entering into kindergarten ready to interact with kindergarten materials. So we have to understand our communities to be able to serve them, and you can't just erase whole swatches of people. That's that's an antithesis of to what we're at the essence of who we want to be and want to do. We lead some work. We lead a body of work called Go Far Louisiana, and that's spelled the Great Louisiana Way, GEAUX. And it really is about centering racial equity in the work of early childhood systems to meet the needs of families and providers and their children. Again, why do we continue to do this work? It is the work that we have to do. If we want a stronger Louisiana, we do have to invest in our young children and their families. There's no bones about it. And when you have a state that relies on as much federal funding as we do in our state, we're number one in the country for needing the federal funding. We can't turn away from our people. And our people look like are beautiful, and who they are, and the culture that they bring to the table is the essence of our state. So to say, we can't talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's actually the essence of who we are in the state of Louisiana. We are a true gumbo pot in the state of rich culture, and ethnicity. And so we have to continue to bring that forward. And one of the things we often talk about is, while we're not rich in resource in our state, we are rich in culture, and we like to celebrate that, and we have to lean into that.
Thank you both for those answers. I think one of the things that is definitely the topic of conversation in my advocacy spheres is the fact that um, our indigenous communities, the federally recognized tribes across the United States, our political statuses, we have unique tribal governments and treaty rights that are inclusive of education, healthcare, and to some degree some economic infrastructure. And so when we think about the compromise to that, it's a direct hit and attack on our tribal sovereignty. Additionally, I think on a more global scale, thinking about why it's important to continue the work is primarily because the government right now is compromising our sense of safety. And I think any BIPOC leader doing work in a justice reform field or a justice-based field knows that the very act of our being is an act of resistance. And so when our safety is compromised, it puts us into survival mode. And I think the most important thing is to be a beacon of light and also provide resources so that we can create safety laterally, so that we can stand together in solidarity and go actively challenge what's happening to us. And I think that will only happen in the spirit of solidarity. So on that high level nutshell, um, that's what I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. So just based on what you all have shared so far, you all work in various aspects of education, child development, youth development, whether personally, professionally, or a combination of both. How, if at all, has the current climate impacted your work, and specifically, how are you responding to that?
I'll say it's terrifying to watch, particularly our early learning community, be really scared about what tomorrow can bring. So if we think about the federal funding freeze in January, to watch our childcare providers, they weren't worried about themselves. They were worried about the families that they serve. And so, that's been a hard spot, as well as like turning on advocacy within our state to talk to our congressional delegation, to say, like, we can't lose these federal funds that we have, but also still making a case for why, particularly early childhood education is an economic driver. It's a workforce issue, and we just can't turn our back on young children and their families. And so if we're saying that we want people to have more children, we have to be able to provide the supports and services to be able to do that. And so in this current climate, we always lead with data, but like getting the nuance of the data and then matching the narrative with the data so that as we're talking to elected officials, that they know that that's the community that they serve too, because those are the people that elect them.
Yeah, so it's had a several different kinds of impacts. As a researcher, and Libby, I'm picking up from where you left off in terms of data. I think some of the broader trends that are incredibly troubling is the federal government's taking data, publicly available data sources down, really in an effort to, distort and control the narrative that they would like to see. So for example, CDC data, a lot of education data. Now, with the attempt to dismantle the Department of Education, a lot of data is missing. I was recently putting the final touches in February. I was putting the final touches on a book that called "Doing the Work of Equity Leadership" that I'm working on. That'll be published in the fall. And there were documents from the Obama era administration that I was referencing for the book, and those are no longer there. They're gone. So I think um, the literal erasure of information and knowledge is one big way that I've seen that I've been directly impacted in terms of the ability to access data and information. I think the second impact has been funding. Many people, if they haven't lost funding, have been threatened to, to lose funding, especially in school and organizations. There's these kind of dear colleague letters that were saying that you need to stop everything DEI or you're going to lose your funding. Um, Higher education, a lot of universities have already lost funding. For me, again, personally, I had a IES grant that I don't expect to ever hear back from that was intended to support the Chicago Public Schools implementation of their newly adopted Black Student Success Plan. So some of those kind of things, financial. I think that the biggest piece, though, is silencing and creating a sense of uncertainty and fear. Um, I think that that touches everybody, regardless, and of what kind of state you're in, wherever you're at. There's this kind of palpable fear around the uncertainty of what we can expect. And I think that as I put my educator hat on, we know that children in particular and families thrive when there is a sense of certainty and security. Like people understand what's going to happen tomorrow. They understand what they can anticipate is going to happen next week and next month. That's a core thing that allows people to thrive. And we know from research studies, for example, that children who have a certainty, even if they're at a school or in a community that may be low income or may not have the resources that they need. One important resource is certainty and stability. So I think the kind of the fear and the uncertainty that this current administration is instilling overall in our population, I think is one of the kind of most kind of chilling impacts that I've seen that's just very troubling for me.
I think coinciding with that, with the trend of certainty and safety and having some sense of stability on a local level here in South Dakota, we had one of our second largest school district in the state of South Dakota had an OCR resolution process in the works at the start of this school year that directly addressed some of the systemic challenges aimed at our Native American students. And as of April 1st, that has effectively been terminated by the Office for Civil Rights. And now it's at the discretion of the district whether they shall execute their ability to do this, or frankly their willingness, because they've always had the ability. The unfortunate reality is that the OCR resolution process gave them the mandate and the timeline and the recipe for how to do it. And now that they pulled it, it gives them, the school district, an opportunity to continue evading responsibility for systemic issues and impacts that have been generationally challenging here in South Dakota. And so that's kind of one of the many on the cherry on top of the cake that these great people outlined today.
Thank you. I know, yeah, the chilling effect is real, and I think even more so, it is the threat of what are absolutely illegal acts. And these organizations, institutions, companies, corporations just kind of falling in line. And it's kind of leads me to the next question I have for you, because if even the most wealthiest, the best positioned entities within our society are like folding in this way, uh, it almost it calls us to wonder if where's the courage, right? Like if this is a capitalistic society and we're focused on profits and making money, um, and to see that even with just with a mere threat, just with a mere letter, that these organizations that have been around for decades, eons, have just bowed to the whims and the wishes of this administration. You sort of wonder, what about the regular folks? How should we feel about that? And so I think that one bright spot that I've seen, at least this week, and I haven't read like all of the fine print on everything, but Harvard saying no, right? And I feel like an organization that has such a large um, uh, endowment, is able to do that and is able to weather the storms. Now, we could also talk about the source of the endowment, the source of the funds, the source of the beginnings of the endowment. But I do think that that might potentially uh, start to change the minds and the attitudes of other institutes of higher education and their leaderships and their boards, in terms of how they react and respond to the Trump administration. So just kind of, again, building on that, there's a school of thought that says that we should hold the line on language, right? If we're doing equity work, we should maintain equity, continue to say it, because that is what we're doing. And part of the reason why we're doing equity work is so that we can call out equity and inequity and name a thing. And then there are others who say, we should be subversive. Let's change the language. Let's continue to do the work, because ultimately doing the work is the most important thing. And so what we've seen is that, Dakota, you mentioned removing pages that were under the federal government under the Obama administration. But then there's also organizations that have scrubbed their websites of words like diversity, equity, and inclusion. What's your perspective on this regarding holding the line on the language or changing the language, being okay with changing the language, being more subversive and focusing more on continuing the work?
I've done both things. And so we call it stealth equity. Some colleagues and I about how we're always talking about the components of equity and diversity inclusion without using the term, because we have to move in the space that we're in. But I say that at the same time that a couple years ago, social emotional development got to be a bit of a lightning rod in our state for our early learning development standards. And social emotional development is a term that is in the DSM. It's actually a medical term. And so people wanted to like just change the term, but there weren't they were talking about components of social emotional development, but not social emotional development itself. And so like I really got on the space of like, you can't change a medical term, you know? And it's a long and sort of story. And we were able to keep it in for a little while, and then it ended up getting changed. I think it depends on the circumstance of where you're working, as long as the mission of what you're doing remains the same. And I think what's really radical about any of the work that we are all committed to doing is that fundamentally what we're trying to do is make hope possible. And so we have to make decisions along the way to continue to make hope possible for the communities and the people that we work for. I mean, at the end of the day, I have a few 100,000 bosses, and they're all the babies of Louisiana. That's who I have to answer to. And so sometimes there are words that we can use and sometimes there's not. And y'all, it is a tricky needle to thread. It is a very tricky needle to thread. And so that's why I had to say, like, I've had to do both. And that's just real talk, is like trying to figure out how do we continue to move the needle so the communities and the people that we serve, we're moving the needle in the right way. And honestly, with all the chaos that we're seeing at the federal level, we have to be able to hold the line as much as we can, particularly at the state level too.
Yeah, I think, you said both. My response to most people is it depends, on being able to understand, the context that you're working in, understanding what's at stake. If you do keep a particular, way of talking about the work that you're doing. So changing it. So for example, here, from this through the Center of Urban Education Leadership, we have a workshop for leaders that's called Race Conscious School Improvement. And we decided to keep the title. Even with everything that happened, we said we're going to keep the title, mostly because we want it to be a way to call each other into a community. For what we do, it's much more difficult to call the people who we want to be in community and learning with if we're not specific about the language that we're using, right? So I feel that LGBTQI A plus folks should be able to name who they are, name the values that they have, and call people together. So there's that part of it. That said, there can be and there is consequences to that, right? To keeping a particular way of talking about and naming the work. And so we lost registrants. Some of them didn't it wasn't because they wanted to. It was like, our district won't allow us to attend now. You know what I'm saying? So we kind of went back and forth. But I think ultimately we made the decision that because we are in Chicago, we're in Illinois, we have a governor supporter, we have a progressive mayor, we have a school board who understands and appreciates a commitment to equity, a commitment to racial equity, a commitment to, um, immigrant students, to the, almost 60,000 Venezuelans that have come into Chicago over the last 3 years. Those commitments are there. And so we thought it was important to keep the name, to call together people who can't use specific language. But I think the bigger thing that I'm constantly reminded of is that this is not so much about what people are calling their work, it's about who's doing the work and what people are committed to. If we go back, there was a focus on critical race theory. Then it's DEI, right? What they're calling folks, they're saying, whatever this administration and whatever the MAGA folks want to use to go after people, they're going to use whatever language. I mean, they're actually using the language of discrimination and civil rights, language that people of color and people on the margins help bring into the discourse and to the forefront of on a global scale, like human rights and civil rights. All of that language, all of those things are things that the people who came before us forged that language and that discourse, and it called us together to have a kind of umbrella and a discourse that allowed us to have some kind of solidarity. And really, that's what folks are going after. They don't want us to say equity. They don't want us to say inclusion. They don't want us to say critical. So they're going to go after whatever they're going to go after. And I think that, um, you know, thinking about, like, for example, it's ridiculous because I've been reading articles where there's been grants that have been discontinued for, like, forest biodiversity, right? Introducing native plants into, you know, ecosystems. And when you do that, um, they've just focused on just the word diversity and have gone after everybody and everything that has diversity in it. So I think that it's important that we keep that in mind, that no matter what we change our language to, as Libby mentioned, is, SEL, like whatever we're doing next year, they're going to go after what we're doing next year. This goes back to using many terms that are terms of endearment and importance to people in society. I remember I always say that Trump started running when Barack Obama started running, because he was obsessed with seeing Barack Obama's birth certificate. And that started the birther movement. And so at that point in time, being a Muslim became a derogatory word for that particular segment of society. So my point is that for the most part, whatever people who are committed to doing this kind of work of creating a more inclusive society where people can thrive, there's going to be a segment of society who's going to go after whatever we call the work that we're doing might be.
Thank you both for that. As a nonprofit leader, I'll preface with the fact that our organization does not currently have any federal funds. However, with that being said, who holds the key to our federal nonprofit status? It's the federal government. And so being able to be cognizant about how we're using our language on our website, our title is the South Dakota Education Equity Coalition. So thinking about how we will adapt to the changing environment. And right now we've been working in limbo with our legal team to do that through the professional lens with a contingency plan after some of the dust settles this summer. With that being said, I just wanted to add some additional contextual support. So if we I feel like all of as you both clearly stated so well, I think that the buzzwords will become whatever the pivots become in today's society. I think back on the grievance 27 in the Declaration of Independence, where Indigenous people are referred to as merciless Indian savages. Then you fast forward, we weren't even given citizenship rights until 1924. And further underscoring that, we weren't given our religious freedoms until the late 1970s. And so there's this conscience resistance within Indigenous communities about pivoting and learning how to do a lot of things in secrecy, and the work continues, right? I mean, we'll figure out how to continue the work. The only unfortunate thing is many of us, especially in startups, don't have the power or the base to make the powerful and courageous steps that institutions like Harvard have taken, but it's going to take a collective of more courageous leaders with more power, to make those assertions and those stands so that those of us who are smaller and benefit from their stances and could be supportive really benefit.
Thank you. So it definitely sounds like there's uh, strategy and nuance as it relates to the work, but then also a recognition that those actors who are against the work will be against it regardless of what it is called. So I think that it's really important to call that out and to point that out because it may not be just as simple as changing the name, right? That it really is going to be something that is will continue to get attacked regardless of what it's called. And so as we
Yeah,
think
can I
about,
add in one can I
uh-huh,
add in one thing just to underscore that a little bit? I mean, yeah, like right now, like all of this language around who's a terrorist is, a case in point,
yeah,
the folks are deciding who's going to be a terrorist and using that language to justify inhumane and unjust treatment of people.
hmm
Um, the January 6th folks were not called terrorists.
no, not at all.
You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that. I think the other part, though, to add on to and build on to Sarah's point about places like these powerful institutions like Harvard having the resources to actually lose. I think that or they can withstand a loss. I think the other thing to understand in terms of like people power is to tap into the a spirit where it says, what do we have to lose, right? And not only in terms of money, but what do we have to lose in terms of our histories that we can pass down to our children? What do we have to lose in terms of our identities? What do we have to lose in terms of our dignity as people? To be able to walk into a place and claim who you are, right? And claim your identity, to claim your history, to name your history, to buy the books that you want to buy. I mean, it's a we're in a very dangerous place. If folks take a look at what happened in Hungary, the book ban started off with book bans. Then it moved to when you go into a bookstore, there was a black slip over the cover of the book where you could see the title, but this incremental kind of censorship. And now you get to the point where like those books aren't no longer available. Once those books and that record is no longer available, and the thing about it is that this stuff has already been erased from many websites. So if we think about whether we want to be going down the road where we live in a society where like you literally can't find a book about your experience or written by people who have an affinity and an experience similar to yours. That's where we're headed. So I think that the conversation in many ways right now is about what we have to lose financially. But if we think long term, there's much more to lose um, than finances. And so the question becomes, what are we willing to lose? If we're willing to lose some money in the short term to make sure our children can have access to the resources and materials they need in the long term, that's the calculation that we have to be making. Those are the things that we have to talk about. And so there's this way where, Harvard might be like too big to fail. There's also this way that we could think about is from a family level and from a people power and solidarity level. There might be ways that we could think about there's more for us to gain by taking these short-term losses than there is for us to continually like pivot with what folks want us to do. I mean, the election is a prime example of that. People were thinking about the finances, and now folks' families are being deported from the country, and there's conversations about deporting natural born citizens right now. That's what we stand to lose. And so I think that we should think much more expansively about the cost and benefits of actually capitulating to what this particular political moment is asking us to capitulate to.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because you know, when you frame it that way, what we're thinking about potentially conceding on in the short term really has long term implications and far beyond the next 4 years, 8 years, even 12 years. You know, it might be we're talking about reshaping the entire landscape of what education might look like for a generation that has yet to be born yet. So if they don't even have the past knowledge, and they would just be growing up in a world where this sort of uh, approach is normalized, then again, without the oral histories, without the multi-generation, intergenerational work that it takes to raise successful young people, they will have no context. They will have no context for any of this. And as we talk about that and reflect on all that we have to potentially lose, I'd like for you all to share any bright spots that you have seen, heard of, or that you've experienced related to continuing this work in the face of hostility.
I think from a national perspective, I would say the solidarity that exists within my line of work between the National Indian Education Association and our tribal education directors across the United States, but most specifically right here in South Dakota. We've been convening on a weekly basis to determine next steps and how we're pivoting to ensure that educational sovereignty is upheld. I think additionally, across our SDEC network, we were able to convene and hold each other, hold space for each other in light of the fact that this work is in active resistance. I mean, that has been the nature of the game since its inception. I think education was an assimilative tool used to weaponize against the people, and that hasn't changed. We're trying to think about the way we frame the new outlook that could potentially come and hope that our students aren't left behind, but rather redefine what educational sovereignty looks like and how self-determination can ensure that we achieve the success that we deem is appropriate for our respective communities.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, I think the word self-determinism I think is really important. You know, back in January I was having drinks with some colleagues, and you know, the thing that I said is I was like, the little sweet run we had for a few years is over. You know, we back to, you know, a different kind of struggle. Um, and I think that, you know, when I think about self-determinism, the other words that come to mind are mutual aid, solidarity, cooperativism, um, getting back to the things that have sustained us for generation after generation, and being not necessarily not relying on institutions, but being clear-eyed about what institutions will and can provide, and how in this particular moment institutions will fold on the people when their bottom line is threatened, or and when their reputations are scrutinized and those sorts of things. I think that being clear-eyed will help us understand our relationship to different kind of institutions, but also more importantly, help us get back to a place of being self-determined. So thinking about things like study groups, reading groups, you know, how, you know, we share resources, how we think about, you know, childcare, right? If all of the funding is going to get cut for, you know, from, you know, it's not, they haven't mentioned this, but like Title I or whatever it might be, us beginning to think about what it looks like for our communities to fill the gap in a way that has historically been done. Um, and so I think those are the kind of things that actually are, those ideas and the thoughts of that are bright spots for me. They kind of get me excited. I love to think what it will look like to have, children, and mothers and grandmothers, and really kind of relying on one another in a different way that in many ways we have gotten away from because of our reliance on, institutional support that previously didn't exist. I think about my upbringing in South Carolina. There was no Black history at school. I never learned anything about Black history. I got all of my Black history from the church that I went to. So I went to church, and it was a little bit of Jesus and a little bit of Martin Luther King and some Malcolm X and Fannie Lou Hamer. And it was all of those people who we learned about right alongside the biblical stories that we learned. And I think that we can get back to that. And I think this particular moment is helping people get back to that. Some communities have been able to hold on those traditions more so than other communities, but I think that the important thing is that we get back to the kinds of social relationships and mutual aid, solidarity, and cooperativism that has sustained us thus far.
Not, I would echo it's the bright spot that I continue to see is how community comes together to think about how do we take care of each other, and how do we take care of our particularly our young children. You know, we're right. We just started legislative session in Louisiana, and we had an advocacy day yesterday of over 100 people like just stepped up and said like we believe in an early childhood system that is equitable, that meets the needs of children and families where they're at. And so the bright spot is always being in community and listening to the solutions that they know that they have. I think is increasingly important now. To your point too, that you made. Other piece that I think is hopeful is like, y'all, this work was hard before. Like this, none of this work was ever easy. And so being able to find joy in the hard is something that many of us have just always done. Now, sometimes it's a little bit harder to find the joy right now because we have so many things coming at us. But again, like staying steeped in community, staying steeped into the mission and the North Star. Like I keep, we have stock photo as part of our organization, but they're all Louisiana babies, all of them. And so I rotate out a baby almost every week that's on my desk because that's the North Star. And the parents that are supporting them and the community that are supporting them is what always brings me hope and is the bright spot in my day. Because if I forget that this work is about them, then why are we in this work at all? And so for me, it's always community and it's these little people that we're fighting so hard for because the work's going to be hard. It's just a different type of hard right now.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that. And I think as I've heard what you've said, I've been also hearing uh folks talk about the need for us to build social networks and community offline and the importance of doing it outside of these institutions and outside of these systems because if our only lifeline exists on a social media, then if that goes away, just like today we're experiencing a Zoom outage, right? And if we have everything just based in on the cloud or the internet, then we're lacking, a really big part of what it is to be human and to really come together in the social networks, the real in real life social networks. And so I love the fact that you have elevated that in this conversation. And so, Libby, I think you sort of talked about how important it is to recognize that the work has always been hard, but that it is equally important to find joy and to make sure that you're centered on your North Star. In the midst of the resistance and all of the struggle, it is obviously important for us to take care of our well being, take care of ourselves, take care of each other. What has been sustaining you for the last few months?
I mean, for me, the sustaining is again the community piece, but also within our team, of our organization, of being able to have a safe spot within our team to talk about where are we seeing incremental change, where are we, where are the tough spots, but that we have a safe place within our team is something that is sustaining. And then, you know, we work with many partners throughout the state, and to just know that we have each other's back forward, above and below. Like we're in this together. And so like if I see somebody out and about, I don't usually have to say anything. Somebody's got a little eyebrow cock and we're checking in on each other. And so again, having a community professionally, but also the community in which we work with, those are sustaining things every day, all day. Because again, the prior question, this question is the answer for me is the same. Like with this North Star have to be these babies for me. I mean, this is just the essence of who we are and our mission. Like y'all have heard me say this at least 3 times. Like a stronger Louisiana doesn't start unless we have successful children. And so that's always the sustaining piece of like this is we were already stuck in this incremental change spot anyway. We're just having to think about it differently, figure out terms to your point that you made, um, and just standing where we sit, making sure that we're standing where we sit with the communities that we're serving, and not just talking the talk, but being able to walk it in some ways when it's scary.
I love that you mentioned the babies because I was in DC last week and had the pleasure of visiting an elementary school, and I was in a first grade classroom, a second grade classroom, and a third grade classroom. And I remember all of the names of the young people I met, all of the names of the young people I interacted with. You know, I was invited to play with the first graders. I was going over clockwork with a second grader, and the third graders were preparing for their state test. But it just oh, I just love being able to see that, and especially I think there were so many boys in the classroom I think that I interacted with, and I always think about the fact that um, how we see young men, especially young Black men in society, and how I see them in those classrooms, you know, very brilliant, eager to learn, engaged. And I'm like, you know, that's not how they start out. They start out with such bright light and just wanting to do and wanting to be. And so for me and my work, I'm always reminded of those young people who enter our classrooms, who enter our systems, and how what I try to do is just make sure that that light continues to be there for them, um, because it's just so beautiful to watch them and to interact with them. But I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
I think for me, I have the honor and privilege of working intersectionally with a lot of matriarchs in our community. And so the really leaning into that matriarchal wisdom that exists and that exists beyond the reality of this human world, but relying on a lot of ancestral wisdom and bringing that into at the forefront of a lot of our collective spaces. I feel like the power of prayer and solidarity through that. And thinking about how we that's the only constant thing that we can guarantee that if we nurture our spiritual connection, it will stay intact from here until we transition. And I know that seems a little different for a conversation like this, but I wholeheartedly believe we have to ground ourselves there first in the spirit of why we're here, what we're doing the work for, and then going back to that, making sure that our family units are prioritized bef sometimes, especially before we do what we do professionally, because it's so easy, especially when we're being so reactive, to forget who we're here to really support, and that's our own children. And so for me, it's been an eye-opening dose of humble pie and realizing how much time I've been taking away from my own sons to fight this great fight, and recognizing that my care and love for them and my devout prayer is going to take me farther than anything I can resist against the government right now.
Yeah, I echo similar. I think probably when I introduced myself, I talked about my two little ones and their whole group of friends. I probably talked about baseball and all that kind of stuff. I just love being around kids. I think in addition to just seeing them, I think there's this piece that sustains me, which is laughter. I love to hear laughter. I love to laugh. I I watch Sundays comedy from the Laugh Factory clips. Sometimes I'm just in the middle of the day, I'm eating lunch. I'm like, let me look at a 5 minute clip so I can just laugh real quick. So I think that universal experience of laughter is really important. And I think that if when a group of people lose the ability to laugh, um, that is kind of like the absence of hope and a dark stain on kind of like the human experience and the human spirit. So I'm always trying to figure out ways to keep things light in a world that feels very heavy, for myself as well as for the children and the young people.
Thank you. And so now as we open it up to the audience, just want to share a couple questions for the audience to react to. How are you all feeling about navigating the current educational climate? And, think about this as a space that we can be honest and that we can also learn from each other, uh, and share grievances too.
I'm afraid that we're not going to have an early learning system left, especially if we think about early Head Start and Head Start. Um, like I think to your point that was made earlier, that we can rely on each other more to help kind of fill the gap. But the reality is that if I look at the demographics and I look at the statistics of the number of mamas that have to go back to work in the first year of their little one's life, they don't have a choice. They have to be able to earn income, and we don't have a generation like in years past that can stay home. Um, like grandparents, they're still working, and so I'm worried about what the funding constrictions are going to be like. And then, as someone who also doesn't take any federal or state dollars, like how do we continue the work with limited resources because we don't know what the market's going to do. So there are all these things at play of like worrying about the people that we fight so hard for every day to have access to the support and services that they need, but how, as nonprofit leaders, do we continue the resolve with the work as we're white knuckling how we're going to continue to fund our organizations as the economic climate goes up, down, and all around? And then, as I say that, is that we know when there's ever any economic unrest, we see that children's development lags because parents can't give something that they don't have because they're struggling to keep a roof over their children's heads. And so, what does that long term impact look like for the education and child development trajectory over a period of time? And if we think about our 5-year-olds right now, they grew up in the height of COVID. And so there's already these developmental lag pieces that are happening. So what happens when we don't have the supports and services that are in place that we need to make sure that we have healthy, whole little people, so that they're not having adverse childhood experiences confounded on top of them that will impact their growth and development on the long term.
And so thank you, Libby. Thank you for sharing that. Um, for those in the audience, mostly from Urban League affiliates, what is your affiliate doing to continue equity and justice oriented work in the face of increasing hostility?
I can, excuse me, I have to duck out in a minute, so I'm happy to share, to kick this part off. Um, so I'm Andrew from the Urban League of Greater Madison, Wisconsin. Uh, in terms of our funding streams for our youth work, we don't have any that have any kind of direct connection to federal funding streams. It's all mostly funding through our local school district out of their Fund 80, through local city government, county government, that kind of stuff, and other grants and contracts for service. It has impacted some of our other programming, though. We have a HUD certified single family home ownership program that has been impacted a little bit, and we've had to unfortunately change the name of our annual diversity summit from our annual workforce diversity summit to a different name, but the actual event itself is going to continue as it has been in the past, with the same kind of focus on having those kind of critical conversations with employers and local and county and state government in terms of issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to a certain extent, Madison is kind of fits the stereotype of the kind of liberal island in a sea of otherwise conservative state. So we locally don't feel as much pushback as other folks might, just because of where we're located and our connections to like the university and here in Madison and all of that. But so some impact, but not as much as I think other affiliates might be facing.
Thank you, Andrew. Anybody else care to share or open up for questions for our three panelists? Yeah, that you got to do um the wait time for Zoom and navigating to the unmute button. So Charlotte said in Phoenix, we have been having meetings with our elected officers, reaching out to our local media and activating our YPs, which is young professionals, to bring awareness of the direct impact it will have. All right, so if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their time, talent, expertise with us today. I know that this is a pretty sobering webinar topic, and we're all trying to navigate this as we all are trying to be respective leaders within our own areas of focus and areas of influence. And it's difficult. It's difficult to do this work. So there's definitely a recognition of how hard continuing this work is, but it is necessary. And I hope that we are all taking time to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other, to find those times to laugh, to think about all of the maternal and matriarchal history, and also just making sure that our work communities and our home communities are strong and intact. Because I hope I'm not speaking for myself, but I think we all want to be here past the next 4 years, right? And I think that we know that we have a lot to live for and a lot to do, but we don't want to burn ourselves out trying to get there. So even while this work is important, let's also find the time to have moments of joy and to make sure that we savor those moments and make sure that they're as contagious as possible. So we're going to conclude today's session. I know we had a pretty small turnout because we've had a lot of issues with Zoom and people are texting me, telling me they can't come in, and I'm trying to like troubleshoot while we're on the call. But gratefully, this is being recorded, so it will go up on our YouTube page, and everyone who registered but was unable to join us today will be able to see the full recording shortly. So again, I'd like to thank you all for attending session 3 of our Education and Youth Development webinar series. I hope that you were able to learn more about how you might work to resist and continue your commitments to equity and justice-oriented work, particularly in the face of increasing hostility. Our next session is entitled Addressing Chronic Absenteeism: What is the Role of Educational Spaces? And that is going to take place on Wednesday, May 21st at 3 p.m. Just a note that after next month's webinar, we will be taking a pause and then resuming the webinar series in the fall. So May will be the last one for now, and then we'll resume in the fall, likely in September. So thanks for everyone being on this ride with us so far. Appreciate everyone's time and candor today. And again, just, wishing you all love, light, and all the moments of joy and peace that you need to sustain you. Thanks, everybody.